Hayom Yud Zayin Elul Taf Shin Pei Hey Ze Hayom Asa Adonai Nagila V'nismacha Bo. So we dealt with last week with Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, and today we'll deal with Yoma, the Mishnayot about Yom Kippur. I feel the most mysterious ceremony on Yom Kippur, most evoking questions and a sense of mystery, is the ceremony of the Seirim, that there were two goats brought, one goat brought as a sacrifice in the temple in the Mikdash, and the other goat sent out La'azalzel into the desert. And what this ceremony is all about, and what it teaches us about the process that we're going through, I'd like to show you in the context of the Mishnah. And here it's truly apropos to the title of my book, The Soul of Mishnah, because much of what we do, and I'll make a claim that you could hold me to, that although the things are not explicit in the Mishnah, if we look beyond the words, behind the words, a story emerges, which and to see if can we see beyond the words the story inside the Mishnah. Okay, so we'll do a share on the screen uh, to and what's lovely is there's a alliteration in our topic, in what I called it both for the Hebrew and the English. In the Hebrew, the title of today's encounter is the Seirim and the Sha'arim, um, which alliterates lovely in Hebrew as the goats and the gates. So we'll see about the goats and the gates and the Seirim and the Sha'arim, exploring this very mysterious ceremony in the ancient Mikdash in Yerushalayim. And furthermore, the Gemara gives us an example of something that the Gentiles would chide us and mock us because this ceremony seemed to be a bit bizarre. Okay, so we'll try to find what it's all about and why it's still relevant. Okay, so we'll look at the Mishnah. I'll read it from the Hebrew and I'll paraphrase in the English. The Kohen Gadol comes to the east side of the courtyard, which is north of the altar. Hasagan mimino v'osbedim mismalo, and with him is his assistant and the head of the Bet Din. V'sham shnei seirim, and there waiting are the two seirim, the two goats. V'kalfi aita sham ubastar galot, and there's some sort of a box that inside there are two lots. Shel ashkurua hayu, and these lots were made out of a wood which is almost never mentioned. And I'll make the stress on almost never mentioned because the one and only time it's ever mentioned in Tanakh is going to be very relevant. A certain type of wood called boxwood is what made the box holding and the lots to be drawn. Vas'an ben gamla shel zahav. Later, they made it into gold. Vayu maskirim oto l'shevach. And that donor who took the wood and made it to gold, they praised him. Okay, so this is the beginning of the ceremony. The Mishnah will be very elaborate in explaining it about how one goat being brought as an offering to God, the other sent out to the desert and thrown down a mountain, and that whole process will be very detailed. But something very surprising, certainly for those who know Mishnah, takes place right now. As opposed to the Talmud Bavli, that almost a third is Agadata, the Mishnah, it's extraordinary rare for the Mishnah to have Agadata, meaning non-halachic material. And here we will have two extensive Mishnayot giving us what could be referred to as Agadata. there is a minor technical reason, a associative reason why these two Mishnayot of Agadah appear, but the reason seems to be rather weak, the overt reason, and this digression. We just started a new topic telling about the two goats, the two Sirim, and we go on a long, long, tedious tangent. It's not clear. There must be something more going on about why the editor of the Mishnah felt that of all places, this is the place to give us this very, very long digression about about the last point in the Mishnah. The last point in the Mishnah that I just read mentions that there was a donor who the box that held the lots, he he made it in gold instead of this ashkara wood. Okay, but it mentions a donor, and now we have a long donor list, and we have a long non-donor list. Okay, so let's read them, and maybe I'll already challenge you to think, if someone could think, what is perhaps the deeper reason for this digression, that it is not taking off on tangent, but rather bringing us to the heart of the matter. Okay, so I'll read in the English the two Mishnayot. It starts going to red letters. Ben Katin made 12 spigots for the laver, for there had been only two. At the sink in the Mikdash, there are only two faucets. He made 12, cutting down the line. He made a mechanism for the laver in order that its water should not become unfit by remaining overnight. King Manbaz had all the handles of all the vessels used on Yom Kippur made of gold. His mother, Helena, made a gold candelabrum over the opening of the Mikdash, the sanctuary. She also made a gold tablet on which the portion considering the suspected adulteress was inscribed. For Nicanor, miracles happened to his doors, and they're all mentioned for praise. I hope I haven't lost everybody by this tangent, which seems to be very not relevant to the story of the two goats on Yom Kippur. But it gets even worse. One more Mishnah. Stay strong. Stay with me. And these, they mention the shame. After the four donors, we're going to do shaming to four non-donors. Those of the house of Gurmu did not want to teach anything about how to prepare the showbread. Those of the house of Aftinas did not teach anything about how to prepare the incense for the temple. Hugris, who was a Levi, knew a chapter of the song about how to sing the song on that the Leviim would sing when they would bring the libations, but didn't want to teach it. Ben Kamzar did not want to teach anyone his art of writing. Concerning the former, it said, the memory of the righteous shall be for a blessing, zichrono lebracha, as we began the shiur for your father. Concerning the others, it is said, the name of the wicked shall rot. Okay, so we've had a very long tangent, and I'll stop the shiur for the time being so I can see everybody's faces. We've gone on a long tangent. We've gotten off the topic. If anybody has ADHD reading the Mishnah, you've probably lost them. And there must be something more significant about why. Why is the Mishnah going on such a long tangent, which is so not characteristic to the Mishnah? It can't just be about the fact the previous Mishnah mentioned a donor, and now we're going to give a list of donors and non-donors. Okay, any thoughts of any of the people here? What is the mystery underlying this Agadah? this tangent, a tangent that doesn't digress but bring us to the heart. Okay, so I'll share a thought about this, and then I'll try to show how deeply embedded this thought is in um in the Mishnah. Okay, the story of the two Sirim is one of the Sirim is brought as an offering to God. The other seer is being thrown out off a cliff into down over a cliff where it falls to pieces. So, and the Mishnah later tells us the two seerim have to look exactly the same. So we have two entities, beings, they look the same. They could be identical twins. It could be the same seer in terms of how it looks. However, one of them's going up and the other going down. One to God and one to the bottom of the depths of whatnot. So what I would like to argue, and this is something actually studying with my students, they brought up, that this is the point which is trying to be made by the following two Mishnayot. We have two groups of four people, or four families. Each of them belonged to the elite. Some were kings and queens, other were high aristocratic Kohen families. We have high society of all the people over here. And on the surface, these are all the elites. However, some of them, through their actions, through their deeds, are remembered as a blessing, and the others, because of some stinginess, not wanting to share other people with their wisdom, with their knowledge, keeping it all to themselves to promote whatever agendas they had, instead of bring greater glory to their houses, they brought disrepute. So in many ways, this is the message. The two Sirim, it's a symbolic ceremony, but it's talking about us. It's saying each of us, we have two paths in front of us. We have one path that could, through what we do, uplift us, bring us up to the sublime, to the divine. But there's also another path that could bring us all the way down. The choice, so ultimately here, the choice is ours. So I feel this gives us an existential message relating to a ceremony, but seeing a ceremony, as most ceremonies, are symbolic. It's symbolic. The two identical looking animals are symbolic, and they're two paths. Which way will it be? Is really telling us we too have our two paths open. Which way are we going to be going? Now, if someone would think that this is homiletical, I will now try to argue that this is in fact embedded in secret ways in the Mishnah itself. There were many types of wood in the ancient world, and many of them were very noble, royal, respectable. We have cedar trees, we have cedar wood, we have oil wood. In different contexts, high-level woods are used in the temple, in all sorts of other places. However, it's only twice in the entire Mishnah, all those thousands and thousands of Mishnayot, that is mentioned this rare wood, ashkarua, or translated as boxwood. And if we look at this, that the one and only other place that wood is mentioned, the ashkarua wood is mentioned, this I think could be the proof in the pudding about the argument that I'm making, that the Sirim are viewed as symbolic of the two paths open to each of us. And for that, we will reshare our sources. Okay, so let's go down where it says Rabbi Shmuel. This is a Mishnah in the tractate of Negaim. The children of Israel, may I be an atonement for them. Already given association to the Day of Atonement. Are like boxwood, neither black nor white, but of an intermediate shade. He's referring to the Jewish people symbolically or physically, the physiology apparently of the Jews living in a time 2,000 years ago where we weren't white like our Scandinavian friends, we weren't black like our Ethiopian friends, but the color of the Middle Eastern Jews living in Eretz Israel 2,000 years ago was something intermediate. I think someone once said the tragedy of the Jewish people that in previous generations it would help being considered to be white and altar ripe would be something which would actually help you in society. Now, with certain forms of DEI, being considered to be ultra white is to your detriment. And the tragedy of Jewish people, when it paid to be white, the Jews were considered to be that non-white group. And now that also the programs are sometimes there are opportunities for being not white. Again, we've joined the class of the ultra whites. Anyway, being as it may, 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Shmuel says that the skin color of the Jews is something intermediate. And the word in the Hebrew in the Mishnah, intermediate, is Benoni, which is a very relevant phrase relating to Yom Kippur, because the Gemara, which now we will read inside, tells about two extremes, and the people that Yom Kippur is relevant for are the people who are the intermediates, the people that are Beinonim, the exact words used in the Mishnah Negaim. Rabbi Kuspidi said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. 3 books are opened on Rosh Hashanah, one for the wicked, one for the righteous, and one for the Beinonim, the intermediate. Those who are fully righteous, already in Rosh Hashanah, they're in the book of life. The thoroughly wicked, right away, the book of death. But the intermediate is held open from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. 2 paths are in front of them. Those who are Benoni, those who are intermediate, both paths are open. If they deserve well, they will enter the book of life. If not, the book of death. So clearly, the fact that of the wood chosen for the box and for the lots of the gorolot being ashkura, being exactly the same wood that reflects and represents the skin color of the Jewish people, and also perhaps the spiritual state of the Jewish people. We're not all sinners, and we're not all saints. This is a truth which is sometimes missed. Our enemies will demonize us, but sometimes we could have a lack of introspection that we don't see that we do have our challenges, things to work on. So symbolizing the Jewish people, symbolizing each of us, symbolizing 2 paths in front of us, that story about the meaning of the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the challenge of Yom Kippur is for the Beinonim, for the intermediate, people that are in the intermediate state, people that are Ashkara. This is why the box for the Gorolot was of the Ashkara wood. So when you put it together, I feel it becomes compelling. Both the 2 Mishnayot of the stories about the donors and the non-donors, those who will be remembered for the good and those remembered for the bad, and the wood of the Ashkura, putting this together, I feel makes a compelling case to see the ceremonies of the two Sirim as really telling us about us and the two paths in front of us, which means that even though we don't have the Mikdash today, we still have the 10 days that we will have to choose which path are we taking. Are we going up or are we going down? Okay, so this is the first teaching that I would like to share with you from the Mishnah. And certainly, before we continue to the second part of today's encounter, and in between, all please feel free for any responses, including challenges and debates. And if so, just open your mic and let your voice be heard. Okay. Now, we're going to get to another topic. Here we spoke about the Sirim telling us something about humanity. The second half is something about the divine, about God. And in fact, as I mentioned, the Agarata says that it was this ceremony about the Sirim which made Jews somewhat of a source of mockery among the Gentiles. And I'll explain why this was the case. The Ramban brings it and shows why, in fact, the deeper meaning of the ceremony is exactly the opposite of what meets the eye with the first encounter. Part of the great challenge of monotheism in the ancient world, certainly in the Greek world during the Hellenism, was whether Zoroastrians of Persia, Hellenists from Greece, they were part of the great challenge is dualism. And Chazal relate to this a lot. Dualism, or in the language of Chazal, shtei reshiot, is a theological approach which it is certainly understandable about how this emerged, why it developed. Dualism believes that ultimately there are two divine powers in the world, two gods. And one reason that leads us to emerge is contemplating reality. There's good in the world, but there is also evil in the world. And I feel one reason why monotheism is truly such an innovation, something that we need revelation, deep thought, and not the knee-jerk understanding of the reality, is we know, as certainly some painful events of this week in Yerushalayim, in Gaza, and Bezat Hashem, there should be refuah to all the psuim and shmirah on all of our chayalim. As I speak, my son is in Gaza. Is that there is evil in the world, and the evil in the world and the suffering in the world is real and it's powerful. So in the ancient world, there were different theologies that believe, so there must be two gods, the good God, the God of good, and the God of evil. And in like some superheroes comic, a constant struggle between the God of good and the God of evil. Or maybe in Star Wars, you have the Force, the dark side of the Force, and the positive side of the Force. So dualism, or shtei reshiot, was a belief of many in the ancient world, and some would try to worship the good God, but they'd always try to have good connections with the God of evil, if not worshiping the God of evil. And a shallow approach to the ceremony of the two Sirim might see this as tainted with this idolatrous belief, because if you a first shallow glance would say, Well, there are two seerim. One goes to God, and that other seer goes to Azazel, goes to the devil. So maybe Judaism is also affirming two powers. So the Ramban, in his commentary to the Torah, shows that by looking closely, we see the opposite is the case. It is very clear. It is not that we bring one seer to God and we bring one seer to Azazel, to the whatever demons are in the desert. Rather, the Torah and the language is very clear that in the words of the pasuk, "V'amidu shnei sirim b'fnei Hashem," both sirim are placed in in front of God, in front of the entrance to the temple, and then goralot, sort of a lottery, which determines which one will be offering to God and which one's sent out. Throughout Tanakh, goralot, lot is a symbol of a way of God expressing a message. For example, in the book of Joshua, when it's told that there's been somebody who has somebody um, somebody who has stolen um, something, it is through lotteries that we identify that the transgressor is identified. So lotteries is not random, but it's one of the ways that certain lotteries to express divine will. So the Ramban writes, by bringing both Sirim in front, Lifnei Hashem, and then having a Hagrala, it's clear that essentially we bring all to God. God, master of the universe, could sending one out is saying we acknowledge that there's evil in the world, but realize that all forces in the world are under God, and one way to express that is not ignoring the reality of evil in the world, but having it as all from God is, yes, the 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 energy that underlies the evil, maybe not the choice of energy, all of the energy, all of life forces are from God. So even to the darkness of the desert, whatever's there, that too is from God. This is the message of the Ramban, a message challenging the dualism of the Zoroastrians, ancient Zoroastrians, of some parts of Hellenistic culture, saying all, whereas the verse in Yeshayahu says, Yotzer or v'rechoshech, Oseh tov u'barara. God has created the light and the darkness, the good and the evil. This doesn't answer why is it that God, master of the universe, allows within the universe suffering and evil. This is the great question, the unanswered question, which the book of Iyov, for example, is dedicated to. And there, Iyov stands up against his friends who try to explain his suffering, and Iyov chooses not to expect the explanations, but continue faith in God and loyalty to God, despite not having an answer explanation for why is it that in the world of God, with God as master of the world, there is that presence of evil. Okay, so this is the meaning of the ceremony according to the Ramban. And here too, I will try to show that this too is embedded in the Mishnah, which again, at first glance, it gives us some technical details, but as many things, there's more than meets the eye. And again, as we mentioned, if you're interested, unfortunately, for time being, at least I have to say one more encounter with you. But in my book, Soul of Mishnah, we deal with 200 Mishnayot, and there's a link if anybody's interested in the book in the first chat. Okay, so we mentioned one in that Mishnah about the donors, that the very existence of it, what's it doing there? raises a question that we dealt with earlier. One of the four donors is somebody called Nicanor, who brought doors, gates to the temple, to the Mikdash. And the Mishnah even mentions there's some sort of a miracle associated with those gates. And we will look into the gates of Nicanor and that miracle. And by putting that together, I think we could empower and see the message of the Ramban as hinted to in the Mishnah itself. But for this, we will reshare. Okay, so it says there are two sources, one in the Tosefta, afterwards in the Talmud. They each have something the others don't, so we'll see them together. What was the miracle that happened to the doors of Nicanor? They said, when Nicanor was bringing them from Alexandria, Nicanor was from Egypt, and he's bringing these doors from Alexandria. A sea wave came over them to drown them. They took one of them and threw it in the sea. Presumably, if your boat is in danger of sinking, you try to get rid of some of the weight. They wanted to throw the second one as well, but Nicanor did not let them. He said to them, if you throw the second, throw me in with it, meaning over my dead body. He was grieved until because although he saved one of the doors, he was grieved because he had lost that other door. And he reached the port of Jaffa. As soon as he reached the port of Jaffa, the first gate came from underneath the boat. This heavy metal gate apparently floated on water until they arrived in the land of Israel. Some say a sea monster had swallowed it, and when Nicanor reached the port of Jaffa, it spewed out and threw it on dry land. So first, there's a hint, as the editor of my book pointed out, to the story of Yonah, also connects to Yom Kippur, because we're on Yom Kippur. But in the story, so we have the story of a sea being thrown to the depths of the ocean, somebody courageously trying to save at risk the other door, and miraculously both doors are saved. But the meaning of this story and how I feel it interplays, I mentioned, is illuminated through the next Mishnah. Our rabbis taught what miracles happened to his doors. It was reported that when Nicanor went to fetch doors from Alexandria of Egypt, on return a gale arose in the sea to drown them. Therefore, they took one of his doors and cast into the sea, and yet the sea would not stop its rage. This can be the key point. The sea would not stop its rage. When they prepared to cast the other into the sea, he rose and clung to it, saying, cast me in with it. They did so, and the sea immediately stopped its raging. Okay, the second story gives a different interpretation. Why was it that they wanted to throw the gates into the ocean? And that is because that if the first source would lead to the assumption that this was maybe to lessen the weight on the ship, it is clear from the second source that this was some sort of a bribe, an offering to the sea itself. Because the words is, the sea would not stop its rage. In the original Hebrew, it's zafo, the anger, the rage of the sea. This, I think, as many stories in Chazal, are responding to Greek mythology. Part of Greek mythology believe that there was Neptune, Pluto, the god of the sea, and sailors sailing on the sea would have to make sure that they are in good graces with the god of the sea, and sometimes have to make sacrifices. So with these sacrifices, on the surface, it would seem that they made a sacrifice to the god of the sea, and they wanted to give everything to the god of the sea, and Nicanor refused, and ultimately they saved one of the doors. But the miracle was that not only one of the doors was saved and brought to God in the temple, but both doors were saved, because even this door that seemingly was thrown into the sea ultimately really was La Hashem, to God. And putting this all together, this is exactly how the Ramban explains the mystery, the symbolic meaning of the two Sirim. On the surface, one goes to God, the other to Azazel. But ultimately, we realize that all of them are to God. So this is the meaning of the story, which again, seeing that this miracle mentioned in the Mishnah, right after the Mishnah of the Sirim, takes on new meaning. And as I said, just like we had two Sirim, we have two Sha'arim, which again alliterates in English as well, the two goats and the two gates. And furthermore, in the Medrash Halacha, it says, if you really want this cherry on top, the Sifra, the Medrash Halacha says that the place that they would originally bring the two Sirim would be right in front of the two Sharim of Nicanor. Okay, so yet again, a minor phrase in the Mishnah clues us in this major meaning, theological meaning of the oneness of God, despite our turmoiled world filled with good and evil and feeling of so many forces in the world, that God is one being affirmed. And maybe this is a good opportunity to mention that in the link I sent in the first chat, in fact, it's a link with discounts to all of my books. My most recent book in English is entitled God Shall Be One, Re-envisioning Judaism's Approach to Other Religions. So if you're of interest, you have that, and also my book on Jewish spirituality. Okay, now to tie all this together, just like we saw, there were two, Nicanor connects up to the theme we mentioned earlier of the two gates and two goats, but Nicanor also is relevant because just like they were in the aristocracy of Jerusalem, they were the donors and the non-donors, the good and the bad, so too there were in fact two Nicanors. Our Nicanor was mentioned for the good, but the Gemara in Yoma tells us that there was another Nicanor who was infamous, and he too was connected to the gates. Okay, so let's continue to our last source for today, which is from the Gemara in Tanit, Daf Yud Chet. It has been taught Nicanor was one of the Greek generals. There was the Nicanor that brought the gates to the temple. I don't know whether he was Jewish or he wasn't Jewish. We know that in the building of the temple, I think one important theme, there was always non-Jewish participation. In the first Beit HaMikdash, Hiram, the king of Tzor in Lebanon, brought the cedars to the building of the first Mikdash. In the second Mikdash, we had Koresh, the king of Persia, as being a great benefactor relating to the Mikdash. And we're looking for a major donor for the third Mikdash. So it could be the Nicanor from Alexandria of Egypt wasn't necessarily Jewish. But what's certain is the other Nicanor was Greek. It has been taught Nicanor was one of the Greek generals. Every day he waved his hand against Judah and Yerushalayim. He was an enemy of the Jewish people, and exclaimed, "When shall it fall into my hands that I may trample upon it?" But when the Hashmonaim rulers proved victorious and triumphed over him, they cut off his thumbs and his big toes and suspended them from the gates, again, the gates of Jerusalem, as if to say, the mouth that so arrogantly, the hands that waved against Jerusalem, may vengeance be exacted. So we see there were two Nicanors, and there are two Sirim, two gates, and two Sharim, and two groups of aristocrats living in Jerusalem. So these all emphasize the two major messages that I tried to share with you tonight. One message, a message that the two Sirim are the two paths open for each and every one of us. And the other message about how the Sirim are an acknowledgement of the complexities of good and evil in the world, and in our turbulent world, to express our fundamental Jewish belief that above all these forces, even if we don't fully understand it, is the one Hashem Echad. Okay, so I see that this topic within Yoma, we've managed to complete and even leave a little bit of time left. So first, if there are any responses, happy to hear. And if not, we could continue within our study of the Mishnah of Yoma. Okay, so
Actually,
please, Chaim.
in the Sidur, you quoted the Yeshayahu Memhe, but we don't say Ose Shalom Uvore Ra. We say Uvore et Hakol. So, which sort of
Yes.
supports what you are saying in that Ra is part of the Hakol. It's not just a cover over of Ra.
Wow. I think perhaps that could get, when you said, perhaps awakens to me to one of the blessings we make on your chuppah, Shekol nivra lechvodo, all is created lechvodo shel kadosh baruch hu, and part of saying that sometimes even the fact that there is evil in the world, but ultimately when evil is overcome, there's also some expression of l'chvodo, as certainly in our minds when we felt in the different, exactly a year ago with the Hezbollah, with Iran, and we're still waiting for news exactly what happened, that somehow, when almost miraculously forces of evil are overcome, this too could be one of the ways that kvodo of a Kadosh Baruch Hu is expressed. And I see that a hand is raised, so please open your the only name given is iPad computer, but please open and
Hi. I don't like sounding like the sound of God. I'll have to try something else. Hang on a minute. Hello? I think that might be better.
yeah.
No, not better.
Would you like to perhaps write a message in the chat, and I'll speak a few minutes, maybe share a story about something else, and write something short in the chat, and then we could read your response and respond to it.
What I wanted to say briefly was that the two goats are both serving a purpose. One is the sin offering. One is carrying the sins off to the desert. They're both needed for people to feel good about themselves, that they've done something positive, and that the evil or their acts of whatever you want to call it, sinning, is in the past. The other thing is, it seems that the early custom was that the goat Lazazel actually went into the desert, led by somebody, which might actually be a better fate then because at least you had the possibility of living, than the goat that went and was sacrificed on behalf of the people, which is maybe why the custom changed. But it's also interesting that a custom given by God would be changed by either the priesthood or Chazal sometimes is descriptive and sometimes is prescriptive.
Wow. So thank you for those important points, showing how multidimensional as many ceremonies are. I think this is part of the power of ritual, the power of mitzvot, that its meaning doesn't have to be this or that, but it could truly be multidimensional. So thank you for that. And with the minutes we have, I'd like to get to a Mishnah that lies at the very heart of the Masechet. The center Mishnah of all of Masechet Yoma tells about that central moment in which the Kohen Gadol enters the inner sanctuary, Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, with and in there, I have two stories relating to that Mishnah. And unfortunately, relating to the existential realities of living in Israel, there's sadness in them. In the Yeshiva Otniel, or more than 20 years ago, we planned to study Yom Kippur after Pesach. And 2 days before Pesach, one of our very beloved students was studying with his chavruta in preparation for the summer session, and they discussed together the ceremony of the Kohen Gadol entering the Holy of Holiness, and the fact that he would enter with a cloud of incense. And that student, Avi Sabag, said that if you enter with incense, it means it's going to blur your eyes, and you enter this very sacred place, but ultimately you can't really see because your eyes are filled with smoke. So the spiritual message that he took from this, he said that to enter places that are truly holy, we must to enter places that are truly holy, we must acknowledge that we know that we do not know. He spoke about humility, about encountering the sacred, encountering God. It is essential to have humility to know that we do not know. And tragically, this is the last teaching that we know from this student, Avi Sabag, of blessed memory, because the very next day, driving home to Otniel, to the yeshiva, during the second Intifada, this is more than 20 years ago, he was gunned down by terrorists. Truly, truly giving us a sense that this last teaching speaks to us, teaching about, we truly realize, truly know that we do not know, that we do not understand how evil could have so much power over our lives, and that the grace and goodness of God is often is not there to protect us. So this is what that Mishnah always awakens in me, that profound teaching that we know we do not know. When you go and deal with the holy, we have to have that humility to realize that teaching. But there's yet another teaching from that same Mishnah that relates to the follow-up. This was right before Pesach of 2002, and shortly afterwards was that enormous massacre at the Park Hotel in Netanya. And after 2 years of relative passivity in the face of terror and evil, Israel went and launched what's called Chomat Magen to realize We have no choice. We have no choice. We don't want to have to do this, but we have no choice but to fight. And my students were all drafted. So I would come to the Shiva to an empty Beit Midrash, because as in the war in Gaza, all the students that had, certainly those had already had been in the army, were all drafted. So I would sit alone in the Beit Midrash. I would prepare the topics, and I would call my students, hoping here and there for them to have a minute free to share. Maybe I say Torah in motion like now, some of what is being studied in the Beit Midrash. But some of them would sigh and say how much they feel that they're missing out on such a beautiful study. And I would console them with this very Mishnah telling about the entry of the Kohen Gadol to the Holy of Holiest. Because that Mishnah says that when the Kohen Gadol would be at this most sacred place on earth, he would stand facing the Kodesh HaKodashim and he would pray. But it would be a short prayer. And the reason it would be a short prayer, because he didn't want, because the people outside were concerned, because sometimes the encounter with the holy, sometimes Kohanim that were not worthy did not survive the encounter with the holy. So he knows outside they are concerned, outside they are worried. So the Mishnah says, in order not to concern the Jewish people outside, even though he's at the high point of his life, the holy of the holiest, he would keep it short, go out, because he would be, he realized that's where he's needed more. So I would say to each and every student to say, yes, truly being in yeshiva is like being and studying Torah. It's like being the high priest in the Beit HaMikdash. However, just like even on Yom Kippur, the high priest would go out because Am Yisrael needs him to come out now. You too, like the Kohen Gadol, you too have left the Beit Midrash on behalf of the Jewish people, on the behalf of Am Yisrael Chai. And those who haven't, our very humble anonymous participant listed as iPad sent a message in the WhatsApp. I'll read it for him. The goats, actually we heard it before, but if you want to read it again, a interesting point about the goat in the desert somehow having some positive aspects of having that being your fate. Okay, so these are the Mishnah. Although we don't have time for this, I'll mention it's in Sola Mishnah for those who are interested. In the Sola Mishnah, I argued that actually the most important ceremony of Yom Kippur is actually the one mentioned not in the tractate of Tanit that tells that twice a year on Tu B'Av, but also on Yom Kippur, the woman of Jerusalem would go out to the vineyards with white clothing, and they would dance together. They would dance and sing together. And in Sola Mishnah, I show why I believe this was truly the essence of Yom Kippur, the white clothing representing the Kohen Gadol and the daughters of Jerusalem, referring to the sake of Shir Shirim, the Song of Songs, which profile the Banot Yerushalayim, the daughter of Jerusalem, and there, representing the Kohen, these women are representing the Jewish people dressed like the Kohen Gadol, and it's their sacred dance that they are bringing the kapara. I tried to argue this from the Mishnah, but you'll have to check out Sola Mishnah to add that dimension. Okay, so next week we'll again be together, Bezrat Hashem, and then we will study, talk about Sukkah to complete the trilogy of the 3 Chagim of Tishrei. So if you're in Israel, Erev Tov. If you're in America, Tzoraim Tovim. And for all of us, we began with Simcha. We'll end on the time of our joy, Sukkot. To balance the joy, we read the book of Kohelet. Maybe like the two goats, that balance. So we'll end with the verse from Kohelet. Sof davar, hakol nishma, et Elohim yira, ve'et mitzvotav shmor, ki zeh kol hadam. Goodbye to everybody. Bless you all.
תודה רבה.
Okay, v'simcha. And again, welcome to check out the link for all the books.